What is the goal of natural language processing? What is it?
Computers talk in numbers, ones and zeros, binary, and humans talk in words. And how do we get computers to understand how we talk? I'd be interested to dive into a few specific recognizable examples of NLP. Do you have any that come to mind?
Amazon's Alexa. Gemini uses NLP to understand what we input, but then also to be able to produce an output that we, the humans, can understand.
The one top of mind challenge and concern for me is language diversity because all humans have a different natural language.
Hi, everyone. Before we start this week's episode, we have one little favor to ask you. Please follow or subscribe so we can help more people learn about AI and make educated decisions about how to appropriately implement technology into their personal life or business. Thank you. All right, Will. So last week, if you remember, we spoke all about machine learning. This week, we are talking all about natural language processing. If we had a whiteboard, which I used to when I was a teacher, I would draw out a graphic organizer with NLP as the topic. And I would then break it into three subcategories, one being what is it, applications or use cases, and then the third one, challenges. Would you create those same subcategories or would you maybe label them differently?
Yeah, I think I'd keep those, like what is natural language processing, the applications, use cases, and challenges. And then maybe I'd just break down the what is natural language processing into what is natural language, just to start with as a definition. And then maybe adding a simple layer of how does it work? This is what it is, this is how it works, these are the use cases, and these are the challenges.
I could see you liking like a hub and spoke. Have you ever seen that kind of a graphic organizer where there's the topic in the middle and then all the spokes of all the subtopics or smaller details? You'd
Oh,
probably like
wow.
that one.
Yeah, yeah, kinda like I mean, mind maps, but I've never
Yeah.
heard. Yeah, yeah.
So let's start with the first subtopic. What is the goal of natural language processing? What is it? So, the way I understand it, when computers understand human language with the ability to break it down, which I compare in the English language to sentence diagramming, which I did as a child years ago, where you're identifying like specific words or parts of speech. So, when the computers understand human language with the ability to break it down, even like recognizing an emotion,
Yeah,
would you
yeah,
add anything there?
I'd say the same thing. It's, the goal of natural language processing is to get computers to understand natural language, and natural language being how humans talk. So computers talk in numbers, ones and zeros, binary, and humans talk in words. And how do we get computers to understand how we talk? So that's, yeah,
You
basically.
know what's so funny? When I used to see people working on coding, like in the background, right? And I'd see a screen and there would be a lot of letters, numbers, symbols, like all jumbled up in funny lines. I looked at that like, I don't know how this person really understands what any of that means. But now I'm kind of getting that's the way the computer understands our human language. That's how our language looks to a computer, I think.
Yeah, and natural language processing tries to bridge that gap so that it makes sense to the computer. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we better understand what natural language processing is, let's talk some general use cases. Well, off the top of my head, I think of chatbots, virtual assistants, AI assistants, just like the Clerk Chat AI assistant. Maybe when ChatGPT or any other familiar model summarizes text that you give it, if you say, here's a bunch of text, please summarize it for me. And then transcription software that also analyzes the tone of customers for sentiment analysis. So I remember probably about a year ago, I interviewed Josh Margolis from Purple Cloud, and this is a specific use case that he had discussed. So, what other common examples might our listeners or viewers be familiar with when it comes to use cases of NLP?
Yeah, I'd say anything that is a computer trying to understand or help us with our natural language, so English or Spanish, with words basically. So that could relate to word processing documents. So like I'm typing on Microsoft Word and I automatically get like a spell check or sentence complete. That's a form of natural language processing. Translation to do with translating languages. That's all natural language processing. I'd be interested to dive into a few specific recognizable examples of NLP. Do you have any that come to mind?
I do. I mean, my first top of mind one is Amazon's Alexa. I use it all day long, 100% of the time. We have one in our kitchen, actually. And I did a bit of research because I almost every day will say to Alexa, Alexa, what's the weather? But I sometimes hear my kids say something like, what's it like outside?
Mm.
They'll phrase it differently than I will. So I know Alexa is 100% trained to understand when I say, "What's the weather?" But it's so interesting to me that Alexa can also understand a similar phrase, like for my child, "What's it like outside?" So I wondered why that was possible. And that's because of NLU, which is natural language understanding, which is the ability for a machine to be able to infer, which I think that's pretty wild. Do you think that's wild?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's totally impressive. And it kind of links back to our topic from last week, machine learning, and how that links to NLP, which is machines are able to understand, that what's the weather today and what's it like outside mean the same thing because of the training data they've gone through, and the machine has learned from that. And so it knows when someone says, "What's it like outside?" That means, "Tell me what the weather is."
So amazing. It's like humans can do that. Humans can find synonyms for words, but it's pretty cool that a computer can do the same.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So another example is an LLM like Gemini, which I use. It uses NLP to understand what we input, but then also to be able to produce an output that we, the humans, can understand. At ClerkChat, we have an AI assistant, which several companies will use either as a sales or a support agent. This is one example of a relatable use case. So, for instance, let's pretend I own a law firm, but in the evenings, I don't want our main business number to go to voicemail. Instead, my phone line could be set up for text messaging, and the ClerkChat AI assistant can be enabled to respond to text messages during those off hours. So, if I'm understanding correctly, though, natural language processing is what's actually making it possible for the ClerkChat assistant to understand the incoming message and then also to be able to respond to it. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly correct. And yeah, so humans communicate over SMS, over text message using natural language. And so on our back end, our AI is using natural language processing, NLP, to understand the user message and generate an appropriate response that's also in natural language so the user can understand it.
Awesome. So, speaking of chatbots, did you know that YouTube has an AI chatbot?
Wow, no, no, I didn't know. I mean, it seems like basically every software or platform that we use has now got some form of chatbot. And like Notion that we prepare the doc on, it's got an updated AI that it just came out with. What do you think
So
about?
I actually oh, sorry. So I actually can't use the YouTube AI chatbot because it's only available if you're a premium subscriber on an Android device, which I am not. But for those that are, and if anyone watching or listening is, you could tap the ask button with that little AI symbol while you're watching a YouTube video, and it'll help you learn more about the content. You can either write your own question or you can use one of the suggested questions. And responses are from LLMs, and LLMs use NLP. And by the way, I read through the frequently asked questions because I was curious more about how it works. And Google does say that if you use this AI chatbot, Google will collect data around your use of the tool and your input.
Mm, yeah, I guess that makes sense. They collect all our data anyway, but yeah. That's we use it for free. Actually, we don't because we pay for YouTube Premium, but so yeah.
If we were to pretend we have our whiteboard in front of us, we would have our 3 subtopics, and the last one I had suggested was the challenges. So, language is challenging. Sometimes a word or phrase or expression could have various meanings, and the machine would have to be able to detect the context. I guess in a way, I'm also thinking about idiomatic expressions. Also, being able to for the computer to be able to acknowledge sarcasm and appropriateness, I have to imagine that's a challenge for machines and computers. And then what happens as our knowledge and vocabulary evolves, if you happen to be using something like ChatGPT, at one point at least, it said that it only had information up until a certain date. So if we continue evolving and our ability for language evolves, are the computers going to evolve with us? But separate from that, I'm curious if you have any top of mind challenges or concerns.
Yeah, I have a couple, and actually one you mentioned, humor and sarcasm is really interesting, and one that OpenAI seem to have kind of tackled with their new voice mode, where it can kind of understand sarcasm in your voice and understand and reply sarcastically, like you could say, be a sarcastic teenager, and it understands that, which is quite cool. That's their new voice mode that is coming out this week, or it's being released to different users this week.
Is that different than the ability when you're in ChatGPT to talk to it and it responds to you?
It's the same thing, but they've got a new voice mode that's more advanced than the current one. Maybe you have access to it already because 'cause they're just rolling it out to users, like, throughout the week.
Okay,
Um, but yeah,
I'll have to check.
I'm sure there'll be, like, an update popping up. But the one top of mind challenge and concern for me is one that we mentioned last week, which was diversity, like language diversity, because all humans have a different natural language, and even British English, American English are actually kind of different, and English across the world is very different. And so ensuring AI is able to communicate in all natural language forms, it is crucial for diversity of thought, but also inclusion of different groups of people. This comes from models being trained on diverse data, so different dialects, different speech patterns, not just data from Europe or the US, but data from all around the world.
I love that you brought that up because I also think that that is so important. And you even gave just a simple example of you and I both speak English. It's the same language, but there are so many variables and there are so many differences to our English language. Just as a very simple example, I read Harry Potter years ago. I was in England doing my study abroad in 2001. I was in a really awesome, cute, small bookstore and browsing, and I saw all the Harry Potter books, and I picked up the first one, and I said, "Wow, it has a different title." One of the first ones is called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and one of the versions is called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Oh, see, I know Philosopher's Stone.
There were some phrases, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, as I was reading the version I had picked up in London that were different than phrases that were used. So, although this is like such a small example, can AI pick up on that?
Oh, well, yeah, and ideally it would, right? It would be able to recognize those differences and generate and understand outputs based on those differences, yeah.
We would really love for our viewers or listeners to share your thoughts or questions about natural language processing in the comments or reach out to us on social media. You could check our links in the show notes or description. Thanks so much for tuning in.